August 25, 1944, Saint-Lô, Normandy, France. The pen shook slightly as Private Emmanuel Green of the 3214 Quartermaster Service Company wrote in his diary, recording words that would reshape his understanding of modern warfare. "We thought the Wehrmacht was unstoppable. We had no idea what American industry could do. Through the convoy staging area, he had just witnessed something that contradicted everything he understood about military logistics. Thousands of GMC Jimmy trucks lined up in perfect rows, engines idling, their drivers young African-American soldiers barely out of their teens, preparing for a mission that would outrun the vaunted German Blitzkrieg with nothing but rubber tires and gasoline. In Germany, the legendary panzer divisions had conquered Poland in weeks, France in months, pushing deep into Russia on a tide of mechanized warfare. Yet here, in what German propaganda had dismissed as a weak democratic nation, logistics were about to accomplish what no army in history had achieved, sustaining a 400-mile advance at speeds the Blitzkrieg never matched. 3,558 trucks prepared to roll eastward on this inaugural day. What none of them knew was that this moment would prove the superiority of democratic industrial might over fascist military doctrine, a systematic demolition of German strategic thinking through the sheer display of American organizational capacity. The mathematics of Allied victory were being written not in battle plans, but in production statistics and convoy schedules that would soon expose every weakness in Hitler's war machine. The crisis had begun on July 25, 1944, with Operation Cobra. General Omar Bradley's First Army broke through the Normandy hedgerows after nearly 2 months of grinding attrition. The breakthrough unleashed Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army, which became operational on August 1st. Patton's armour erupted across the French countryside, advancing at speeds unprecedented in military history, sometimes covering 75 miles in a single day. The German Seventh Army collapsed. By mid-August, Allied forces had encircled and destroyed German forces at the Falaise pocket, eliminating approximately 50,000 enemy soldiers and leaving another 10,000 dead. The road to Paris lay open. The road to Germany beckoned, but victory had created its own crisis. The Allied advance had outrun every logistical projection. Each American division in combat operations consumed approximately 750 tons of supplies daily, everything from ammunition and fuel to rations and medical supplies. With 28 divisions pushing eastward simultaneously, the daily requirement approached 21,000 tons. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. The pre-invasion bombing campaign that had crippled German reinforcement capabilities had also devastated French infrastructure. Allied bombers had methodically destroyed every major rail line in northern France to prevent German counterattacks. The strategy succeeded militarily, but created a logistical nightmare. Traditional supply methods could not function. The major French ports remained in German hands. Cherbourg had been captured, but German demolitions had rendered it nearly useless until late September. The port of Antwerp, captured on September 4th, would not be cleared of mines and opened for shipping until November 28th. Every ton of supplies still came across the Normandy beaches through the makeshift Mulberry harbours, artificial ports towed from England and assembled in the Channel. By late June, these innovative structures had unloaded 170,000 vehicles, 7.5 million gallons of fuel, and 100,000 tons of supplies. The system worked, but it could not keep pace with Patton's advance. The solution emerged from a 36-hour brainstorming session in late August, involving Colonel Lauren Albert Ayers, known to his men as Little Patton, and Major Gordon Gravel. These Transportation Corps officers faced an unprecedented challenge. They needed to move massive tonnages over distances that exceeded anything American logistics had previously attempted, using roads that had not been designed for heavy military traffic through a country still partially occupied by German forces. The solution they devised borrowed a term from American railroad practice. Since the 1890s, Santa Fe Railroad had marked priority express shipments with red balls painted on the sides of freight cars. Around 1892, the railroad began using this designation for perishable goods and priority freight. That needed immediate transport. By the 1920s, Red Ball designation indicated the fastest, highest priority cargo throughout American railroads. Trains carrying Red Ball freight received absolute priority. All traffic cleared for their passage. In Normandy, this concept would be applied to trucks. Colonel Ayers and Major Gravel designed a one-way loop system. 2 parallel routes would connect the Normandy supply dumps to forward logistics bases near Chartres, approximately 125 miles inland. The northern route would carry loaded trucks eastward. The southern route would carry empty trucks back to the coast. Both routes would be closed to all civilian traffic and would have absolute priority over all other military movements. Military police would control every intersection. No convoy would stop for anything except mechanical failure or enemy action. The plan required assembling a massive truck fleet in record time. 132 existing Transportation Corps truck companies were consolidated into a single mammoth operation. The primary vehicle was the GMC CCKW, a 2.5-ton, 6-wheel drive truck universally known as the Jimmy or the Deuce and a Half. General Motors had designed this workhorse in 1940 and began serious production in February 1941. Over 560,000 would be manufactured before production ended in 1945, making it the second most produced American military vehicle after the Jeep. The CCKW designation came from GM's naming convention. C indicated the 1941 model year. The second C designated a conventional cab configuration. K meant all-wheel drive with powered front axle. W indicated twin dual-wheel rear axles. The name Jimmy came from soldiers' pronunciation of the GMC letters. The Deuce and a Half referred to its 2.5-ton payload capacity. The truck featured a GMC 270 engine, an overhead valve inline-6 producing 91.5 horsepower, later models generating 104 horsepower at 2,750 revolutions per minute. The engine delivered 216 pound-feet of torque at 1,400 RPM. This gasoline engine, originally designed for commercial trucks, proved remarkably reliable in military service. The 3 25/32 inch bore combined with a 4-inch stroke created a displacement of 269.5 cubic inches, or 4.4 litres. Power flowed through a Warner T 93 5-speed transmission. 4th gear was direct drive. 5th was overdrive, allowing the truck to maintain highway speeds while conserving fuel. The transfer case included high and low range and engaged the front axle for off-road capability. Originally using Timken split-type axles, later production shifted to GM banjo-type axles. Both designs proved robust under the punishing demands of military service. Early CCKWs featured closed metal cabs from GM's commercial truck line. By July 1943, production switched to open cabs with canvas roofs and doors. This design change served multiple purposes. It simplified manufacturing at a time when every hour counted. It reduced shipping height, allowing more trucks to fit on cargo vessels. It improved ventilation in hot climates, and it increased visibility for drivers navigating crowded roads and dangerous terrain. 1 in 4 cabs included a machine gun ring mount above the passenger position, though most Red Ball trucks operated unarmed, relying on speed and numbers for protection rather than firepower. The trucks featured a ladder frame chassis with 3 driven beam axles. The front axle mounted on leaf springs. The rear tandem used leaf springs with locating arms to control axle position under load. Standard cargo beds measured 12 feet long. Early beds used steel construction. As steel became increasingly rationed for armor plate and ship construction, wooden beds replaced them. These proved unsatisfactory, warping under load and weather. A composite design emerged, combining steel sides and framing with wooden bottom slats. This hybrid approach provided strength where needed while conserving strategic materials. The CCKW's versatility extended beyond cargo hauling. The platform supported over 20 different body configurations: dump trucks for engineering units, fuel tankers carrying 750 gallons, water tankers for troops in the field, mobile workshops with machine tools, communications trucks bristling with radio equipment, ambulances carrying wounded. The standardized chassis simplified maintenance and training while providing maximum flexibility. Finding drivers proved more challenging than assembling trucks. The Transportation Corps needed 23,000 drivers and mechanics immediately. Many. would come from other units whose duties were not immediately critical. Able-bodied soldiers found themselves reassigned overnight. Artillerymen became truck drivers. Infantry reserves transformed into convoy operators. Most received minimal truck driving instruction. Many had never driven anything larger than a family car. Some, coming from rural backgrounds or inner cities, had never driven at all. The peculiarities of military logistics and American racism converged to create the composition of the Red Ball Express. Approximately 75% of Red Ball drivers were African American soldiers. This resulted directly from segregation policies that pervaded the American military in 1944. Military doctrine held, without any factual basis, that black soldiers lacked the intelligence and courage for combat roles. Consequently, African Americans were systematically assigned to service and support units, working as truck drivers, quartermaster personnel, engineers, and port battalion labourers. This racist policy would inadvertently create one of the war's most critical and celebrated operations. Private James Rookard of Maple Heights, Ohio, was 19 years old when he found himself assigned to the Red Ball Express. He had been drafted in March 1943 and sent to Company C, 514th Quartermaster Regiment. Staff Sergeant Chester Jones with the 3418 Trucking Company had similar experiences. Ernest Myers of the 3214 Quartermaster Service Company articulated what many felt. We wanted to make an impression for the people back home. We wanted to show that black men were combat ready. These young men, mostly under 24 years old, suddenly bore responsibility for sustaining entire armies. They understood the weight of that responsibility and the opportunity to prove themselves that had been denied in combat roles. The Red Ball Express launched on Friday, August 25, 1944, with 67 truck companies. 3,558 trucks, mostly jimmies, hauled 4,482 tons of supplies on the inaugural run. The convoy rolled out from staging areas near Saint-Lô, heading eastward on dedicated routes toward the Chartres-Dreux area where forward supply depots had been established to feed American armies racing toward the Seine. Just 4 days later, on August 29th, the operation had expanded dramatically. 132 truck companies now participated, operating 5,958 vehicles that carried 12,142 tons in a single day, setting the single-day record that would never be exceeded. Official regulations were strict and sensible. Trucks would travel in convoys of at least 5 vehicles, escorted by jeeps in front and rear. Drivers must maintain 60-yard intervals to prevent a single enemy bomb or strafing run from destroying multiple vehicles. Maximum speed was set at 25 miles per hour for safe operation on narrow French roads. Passing was forbidden to maintain convoy integrity. During night operations, trucks operated under blackout conditions using cat-eye headlight covers that emitted only tiny slits of light, enough to mark their presence but not enough to attract German aircraft. Reality quickly diverged from regulations. The urgency of the mission and the personality of the drivers created a very different operation. Veteran mechanic Fred Reese, serving in an ambulance unit, remembered them vividly. Oh boy, do I remember that Red Bull gang. They were a hell of a crew. They used to carry ammunition boxes twice as high as the top of the truck, and when they went down the highway they swayed back and forth. They had no fear. Those guys were crazy, like they were getting paid for every run. Drivers immediately began removing the engine governors that limited trucks to 56 miles per hour. These governors sapped power on hills and prevented maintaining steady high speeds on straightaways. Drivers slapped the governors back on for inspections, then removed them again for actual runs. Speed became everything. Individual trucks routinely ignored the convoy system, departing Cherbourg as soon as they were loaded rather than waiting for escort jeeps. Drivers pushed their jimmies to 60 miles per hour and beyond, racing through French villages and countryside. They developed a motto, borrowed from French, tout de suite, meaning immediately, right now. This became the operational philosophy. Get loaded, get moving, get there, get back, do it again. The convoys ran 24 hours daily. Drivers worked in 2-man teams sharing a single truck. One man drove while the other tried to sleep in the passenger seat, an exercise in futility given the rough roads and constant motion. After 2, Hours, they switched positions. The round trip from Normandy to Chartres and back took 54 hours of continuous operation. The contrast with German logistics was stark and devastating. While American trucks raced at breakneck speeds, the vaunted Wehrmacht still depended heavily on horses. This shocking reality contradicted German propaganda and Allied perceptions. The Blitzkrieg created an image of total German mechanization, panzer columns racing across landscapes while dive bombers screamed overhead. But it was largely illusion, a facade maintained by careful propaganda photography that showed Germany's most modern units while hiding the horse-drawn reality of most formations. German armoured and motorised divisions constituted only a small fraction of the Wehrmacht. The vast majority of German units moved on foot or with horse-drawn transport. The numbers told a remarkable story that would have shattered Nazi propaganda had it been widely known during the war. Germany entered World War II with 514,000 horses. Over the course of the war, the Wehrmacht employed approximately 2.75 million horses and mules in total. At any given time during the war, approximately 1.1 million horses served in German military operations. This exceeded the horse populations used by most armies in the First World War, supposedly the last major conflict before mechanization. A typical 1941 German infantry division included around 5,000 horses requiring 53 tons of hay and oats daily. These animals did not produce that fodder, they consumed it. Every ton of horse feed was a ton that could not be ammunition, fuel for vehicles, or rations for soldiers. Horses had severe practical limitations that became increasingly apparent as the war progressed. They could not operate more than 25 miles from a railhead before fodder supplies began requiring more transport space than ammunition and weapons. Yet German infantry divisions during Operation Barbarossa routinely found themselves 90 miles from the nearest railhead, creating impossible supply demands. The horses ate everything available. During one summer month in 1941 alone, German forces requisitioned 112 tons of oats and 768 tons of hay from Russian farms. Hungry horses gnawed wooden beams, tree trunks, and even walls. They consumed cotton feed bags, leading to digestive problems. Roughage often arrived mouldy, causing illness. Starving soldiers were even court-martialed for eating oats intended for horses, highlighting the twisted priorities created by dependence on animal transport. Horses died in enormous numbers that would have been catastrophic for a mechanized force. 179,000 horses perished in December 1941 and January 1942 alone during the first Russian winter, more than the total number of tanks Germany produced during the entire war. A German soldier wrote in his memoir that a curious odour would stick to the Russian campaign, this mixture of fire, sweat, and horse corpses. The smell of death extended beyond human casualties to encompass the animals that made German logistics possible. The Wehrmacht's dependence on horses created catastrophic logistical limitations that directly impacted operational capabilities. Horse-drawn columns clogged roads that should have carried motorized supplies forward. Horses moved slowly, approximately 3 to 4 miles per hour under load, compared to trucks capable of 40 to 50 miles per hour. They required rest, feeding, grooming, and veterinary care that consumed manpower and time. They panicked under artillery fire, often stampeding and disrupting operations. They could not operate effectively at night without great difficulty and risk. German armoured spearheads repeatedly found themselves far ahead of their supporting infantry and supplies, creating dangerous gaps that allowed encircled Soviet forces to escape in 1941 and 1942. The famous encirclements at Kiev, Vyazma, and Bryansk might have been even more devastating had German infantry been able to close the pockets more rapidly. Instead, horse-drawn units struggled to keep pace with panzers, allowing thousands of Soviet soldiers to escape destruction. The contrast became vivid when German prisoners of war, captured after D-Day, watched American vehicles roll off landing craft. "Where are the horses?" they asked their guards, genuinely confused. They had never seen an army operate without horses. They assumed the massive vehicle parks they observed must be supplemented by even larger numbers of horses somewhere out of sight. The question revealed the enormous gap between German logistics and American industrial capacity. The concept of an all-mechanized army was literally incomprehensible to soldiers raised in a military culture where horses remained fundamental. The Red Ball Express operated in a completely different realm, representing the future of warfare in ways German planners had failed to anticipate. By August 29th, just 4 days after launch, the operation had expanded to 132 truck companies and 5,958 vehicles, the peak that would be maintained through September. At any given moment, approximately 900 trucks were on the road simultaneously, running 24 hours per day without pause. The statistics became staggering. The Red Ball hauled 12,500 tons of supplies daily at its peak on August 29th. Over its 83-day operational lifetime from August 25th through November 16th, the Express transported 412,193 tons of fuel, ammunition, rations, and equipment. This single truck operation moved more tonnage in less than 3 months than entire German army groups could transport over similar distances in a year of operations. The drivers worked under brutal conditions that tested human endurance. 2-man teams shared driving duties on round trips that consumed 54 hours of continuous movement. They drove through rain that turned French roads into rivers of mud. They navigated roads pocked with shell holes from recent combat. They skirted around destroyed vehicles, both Allied and German, that littered the roadsides. They drove through areas where German forces had not been fully cleared, risking ambush and sniper fire. Private Emmanuel Green recalled stepping over dead enemy soldiers when his unit reached forward delivery points. Combat had passed through these areas hours earlier, but clearing bodies remained incomplete. He witnessed a non-commissioned officer in his company severely injured after triggering a landmine near a truck Green had been repairing. The NCO survived, but lost his leg. Green later named his oldest son in honor of that man, ensuring the sacrifice would be remembered. Red Ball convoys also faced hijackers who sought cargo for personal use or black market sales. Gasoline, cigarettes, and medical supplies commanded premium prices on the black market. Stragglers became especially vulnerable to these criminals, who were sometimes Allied soldiers from other units, sometimes French civilians, and occasionally German infiltrators in American uniforms. Drivers learned to travel in groups when possible and stay alert for suspicious activity. The greatest natural enemy proved to be mud. French roads, never designed for thousands of heavy trucks carrying loads far exceeding peacetime standards, disintegrated under the constant pounding. Rain turned unpaved sections into quagmires. Trucks bogged down axle deep, their 11-inch wheels unable to generate traction in the soup. Drivers and mechanics worked frantically to extract stuck vehicles, knowing that every delay meant frontline units running short of ammunition or fuel. Some convoys lost hours to extraction efforts, with multiple trucks chaining together to pull out the deeply mired. Technical problems plagued the operation despite the Jimmy's reputation for reliability. Red Ball trucks were frequently brought to standstill by water in their gasoline, a problem that stemmed from multiple sources. Proper maintenance required purging the gas line filter between the engine and cab regularly to remove accumulated water, but exhausted drivers running on minimal sleep often skipped this step to save time. Condensation was the principal cause in normal circumstances, but sabotage added to the problem in ways that enraged American personnel. German prisoners of war, aware through experience or training that water in gas was the Achilles heel of the 6x6 design, were frequently used to load supplies and fuel trucks at rear area depots. More than one veteran remembered watching POWs deliberately dragging open jerrycans through snow and rain to contaminate gasoline before loading it onto trucks. The POWs sometimes travelled in truck beds during return trips, creating opportunities for additional sabotage. Some veterans reported finding sugar in fuel tanks, sand in oil, and other forms of deliberate damage. The drivers adapted through necessity and ingenuity. They became expert mechanics through trial and error and informal knowledge sharing. They learned to diagnose engine problems by sound alone, distinguishing between minor issues that could wait and major problems requiring immediate attention. They mastered quick repairs in darkness, working by feel when blackout conditions prevented using lights. They developed informal networks too, obtained spare parts through creative requisitioning that sometimes crossed into outright theft from other units. Patton's logistics officers, led by Colonel Walter Muller, became legendary scavengers willing to do whatever proved necessary to keep Third Army moving. They established a reputation for diverting convoys intended for other units, impersonating personnel from different formations to obtain priority supplies, and outright theft from supply dumps. Stories circulated of Third Army trucks appearing at depots with forged orders, loading supplies and disappearing before authentication could be completed. Patton tacitly encouraged this behavior, believing aggressive supply acquisition was as important as aggressive combat operations. The scale of American mechanization awed everyone who witnessed it, friend and foe alike. Germany's most capable mechanized force, the panzer divisions that had swept across Europe between 1939 and 1942, numbered fewer than 30 divisions out of more than 300 total Wehrmacht divisions at the war's peak. America fielded an army where mechanization was not the exception, but the standard that applied to every unit regardless of type or mission. Every American infantry division had organic motor transport sufficient to move its entire complement of personnel and equipment. Every artillery piece was towed by truck or mounted on a self-propelled chassis. Every supply line ran on rubber tires driven by internal combustion engines. Medical evacuation used ambulances and hospital trucks. Engineering units operated with bulldozers and cranes. Communications depended on radio trucks. The entire system assumed mobility at speeds impossible for horse-drawn forces. The Germans had nothing comparable in scale or sophistication. A 1943 German infantry division's supply train employed 256 trucks and 2,652 horses, attended by 4,047 men. These numbers revealed the fundamental contradiction in German military organization. The trucks could move faster and carry more, but they were outnumbered by horses more than 10 to 1. The horses limited the entire division's movement to the speed of the slowest horse-drawn wagon, typically 3 to 4 miles per hour under load on good roads, less on poor roads or rough terrain. In contrast, a lean 1943 Soviet infantry division supply train, aided significantly by American Lend-Lease trucks, operated with just 91 trucks and 556 horses, attended by 879 men. The Soviets had fewer total vehicles than the Germans, but understood the fundamental principle that a mobile force cannot be chained to immobile elements. They increasingly concentrated their limited trucks where they mattered most, accepting that some units would remain less mobile while ensuring that key formations could exploit breakthroughs. The Wehrmacht was literally fighting World War II with logistics that belonged to the previous century, a reality masked by propaganda films showing panzer columns but never showing the horse-drawn supply wagons struggling to keep up. German supply by horse and wagon meant armies could not move faster than walking speed for sustained periods. Armoured spearheads repeatedly outran their supplies, forcing halts that allowed enemies to regroup and establish new defensive lines. This limitation helped save Moscow in 1941, when German logistics collapsed under the strain of distances and winter conditions. It contributed to the Stalingrad disaster in 1942, when German forces became isolated without adequate supply lines. It hampered German response to Allied breakouts in 1944, preventing rapid concentration of forces to contain penetrations. The Red Ball Express exposed these weaknesses mercilessly through direct comparison. American tanks and infantry advanced at previously impossible speeds because their logistics could keep pace through superior organization and overwhelming industrial capacity. Patton's Third Army covered 400 miles in less than a month during August 1944, advancing so rapidly that German forces could not establish coherent defensive lines. Towns that might have been defended fell without significant resistance because German reinforcements could not arrive in time. By late August, Patton had reached the Meuse River. His spearheads crossed on August 31st, establishing bridgeheads that threatened to drive straight into Germany with minimal opposition. The German frontier lay within reach. Victory seemed imminent. Then the advance stopped, not from German resistance but from American logistics reaching their absolute limit. On August 31st, 1944, Third Army ran out of gasoline near the Moselle River, just outside Metz. The Red Ball Express, despite heroic efforts moving 12,000 tons daily, could not deliver enough fuel to sustain Patton's breakneck pace. Every gallon consumed by advancing tanks was a gallon that had travelled 200 miles or more from Normandy beaches. The fuel crisis revealed both the triumph and limitations of truck-based logistics operating at unprecedented scale and distance. An armoured division required 73,177 gallons of fuel to move 100 miles with all its vehicles fully loaded. With all vehicle tanks filled, a division had 121,695 gallons aboard, giving a theoretical range of 166 miles. In practice, divisions needed complete refueling daily during offensive operations, sometimes more frequently during intense combat or difficult terrain. Fuel could not be wished into existence or conjured from thin air. Every gallon had to be physically transported from Normandy to wherever the divisions operated. Patton's Third Army included multiple armoured divisions plus mechanised infantry, tank destroyers, self-propelled artillery, and support units. Daily fuel consumption during the rapid August advances exceeded 400,000 gallons across the entire army. This astronomical figure exceeded the capacity of the Red Ball Express to deliver, particularly given other critical needs for ammunition, food, and medical supplies. The Red Ball trucks themselves consumed significant fuel. A round trip from Normandy to Chartres, approximately 250 miles, required 60 to 70 gallons per truck, depending on load, terrain, and driving style. With nearly 6,000 trucks operating, the Red Ball consumed 360,000 to 420,000 gallons daily just to run itself. This created the paradox that supplying the supply line consumed almost as much fuel as supplying the combat forces. This reality created fierce competition for limited resources and spawned the controversy that would continue for decades. Patton's Chief of Staff, Colonel Walter Muller, became notorious for creative supply acquisition that often crossed legal and ethical boundaries. Third Army logistics officers established a reputation for diverting convoys intended for other formations, impersonating personnel from different units to obtain priority supplies, and outright theft from supply dumps. Patton himself once threatened to shoot the next man who brought him food rather than gasoline, illustrating his single-minded focus on maintaining momentum regardless of consequences. The fuel shortage of late August and early September 1944 sparked one of the war's great debates between senior commanders with fundamentally different strategic visions. General Eisenhower, as Supreme Allied Commander, allocated limited supplies according to his broad front strategy. He believed advancing on multiple axes prevented Germans from concentrating reserves against any single thrust while maintaining flexibility to exploit opportunities wherever they emerged. He gave priority to Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group, advancing through Belgium toward the Ruhr industrial region, Germany's industrial heartland, whose capture would cripple the German war economy. Patton fumed that politics and favouritism toward the British were crippling his advance at a moment when boldness could have ended the war in 1944. He argued, with some justification, that his Third Army had demonstrated superior speed and effectiveness, covering more ground and destroying more enemy forces than any other Allied formation. Continuing his advance while Montgomery prepared methodically seemed wasteful and potentially war-losing. The truth was more complex than either commander acknowledged. No amount of Red Ball trucks could overcome basic geographical and physical limitations. Every gallon of fuel came across the Normandy beaches and had to travel 200 miles or more to reach forward units operating beyond Paris. The longer the advance continued, the more fuel was consumed simply moving supplies forward, creating a paradox where success made further success increasingly difficult. The Red Ball Express, remarkable as it was, could not overcome physics, distance, and the reality that France lacked adequate port facilities until Antwerp opened. The debate raged through September as American forces paused to consolidate gains and rebuild logistics. Engineers performed miracles of reconstruction, restoring rail lines at speeds that seemed impossible. In one legendary case, Colonel Emerson Itchner received orders from Patton to restore a rail line from Normandy to Le Mans. Patton needed 30,000 tons of fuel and ammunition, representing 30 trainloads, delivered by midnight August 15th. He emphasized that his troops could do without food temporarily, But tanks and trucks do not run without gas, and artillery and rifles are useless without ammunition. Halting the advance was unthinkable because it would allow German forces to regroup, fortify Paris, build defensive lines, and slow future operations. Itchner did what truly skilled logistics officers do. He reconnoitred the area by air and studied aerial photographs intensively. He made the crucial decision to concentrate resources on a smaller branch line rather than a heavily damaged main line that included 2 blown bridges requiring major reconstruction. Then he deployed more than 10,000 personnel in shifts working around the clock. The deadline was met through extraordinary effort and willingness to improvise. Trains began supplementing trucks, gradually reducing pressure on the overtaxed Red Bull routes. By mid-September, rail lines were carrying increasing tonnages. The reopening of Antwerp in late November would eventually normalize Allied logistics and end the crisis that had threatened to stall the entire campaign. But for 83 critical days from August 25th through November 16th, the Red Ball Express represented the primary lifeline sustaining American armies advancing across France. Without it, the war in Europe might have continued well into 1946. On November 16, 1944, the Red Ball Express officially ended operations. Rail transport had been restored across much of France. Pipeline systems began delivering fuel directly from ports to forward areas. The port of Antwerp, fully cleared of mines and operational, provided the deep water capacity needed to supply multiple armies. The truck convoys became obsolete for long-distance hauling, though trucking remained essential for final delivery to combat units. The drivers returned to their original units or were reassigned to other transportation duties. The statistics of the operation documented an unprecedented logistical achievement that exceeded all expectations. Over 500 camps across 45 states had trained the personnel involved. 175 main camps with 325 branch camps provided the organizational structure and replacement personnel. The Express operated 5,958 vehicles at peak capacity. It transported 12,500 tons daily at maximum, achieved on August 29th. Over its lifetime, it moved 412,193 tons. Drivers contributed 14 million man-days of labor under conditions that would have broken lesser men. They wore out 50,000 tires, an average of more than 8 tires per truck, demonstrating the punishing conditions under which they operated. Only 2,222 escape attempts were recorded from an operation involving 23,000 personnel, a rate of less than 1%. This remarkably low figure, especially compared to prisoner of war escape rates, demonstrated the commitment of personnel to the mission. No American civilians were harmed by any of the handful of successful escapes, most of which ended with the individuals returning voluntarily after a few hours or days of absence. The Red Ball Express achieved something German logistics never could, sustaining offensive operations over distances and at speeds that rendered Blitzkrieg tactics obsolete when employed against equally mobile opponents. German armoured advances in Poland covered approximately 200 miles in 5 weeks. The advance into France in 1940 covered 250 miles in 6 weeks. Operation Barbarossa saw German spearheads cover 600 miles in 12 weeks before supply problems and Soviet resistance forced a pause. These represented impressive achievements against unprepared or inferior opponents. Patton's Third Army covered 400 miles in 4 weeks against prepared German defences and only stopped because it outran even American logistics capabilities, not because German forces stopped it. The difference was industrial capacity applied intelligently. American factories produced 2.5 million trucks during World War II. Germany produced approximately 300,000, less than 15% of American output. American trucks were standardized, reliable, designed for mass production, and supported by a supply chain that could deliver spare parts anywhere. German trucks were diverse, often unreliable, difficult to maintain, and supported by a supply chain disrupted by Allied bombing. The arithmetic was brutal and decisive. American production exceeded German. Production in virtually every military category. In 1944, the United States manufactured 96,000 aircraft. Germany manufactured 39,800. America built 17,376 tanks and self-propelled guns. Germany manufactured approximately 9,000. America produced a Liberty ship every 42 days on average at peak production, with the record being 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Germany's entire merchant marine construction for the entire war totaled approximately 1 million tons. The United States built over 53 million tons of merchant shipping, more than 50 times German output. These statistics were not abstract numbers. They represented the difference between victory and defeat, between armies that could sustain operations and armies that collapsed under logistical strain. The lessons were not lost on German prisoners who witnessed American logistics firsthand. Captured German officers, processed through Allied supply systems, watched in amazement as endless streams of vehicles, supplies, and equipment poured across the Channel. They saw supply dumps that dwarfed anything the Wehrmacht had assembled even during the height of German power. They recognized that Germany had lost the Industrial War before the first shot was fired in 1939. The Red Ball Express validated the assessment that General Robert Barrow would later articulate in memorable words. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals study logistics. The most brilliant tactical operation cannot succeed without beans, bullets, and gasoline. The most sophisticated weapons cannot function without fuel and ammunition. The best trained soldiers cannot fight without food and medical supplies. Logistics determine what is possible on the battlefield. Everything else is commentary. The German Blitzkrieg succeeded brilliantly through tactical innovation and operational excellence against opponents who were unprepared or inferior in training and leadership. It failed ultimately and completely because Germany lacked the industrial capacity to sustain those operations against major powers with comparable or superior logistics. Once German forces engaged enemies with resources matching or exceeding their own, the Wehrmacht's limitations became fatal weaknesses that no amount of tactical skill could overcome. The Battle of Moscow in 1941 failed partially due to logistics, with German supply lines stretched beyond breaking, while Soviet forces operating on interior lines could concentrate reserves. The disaster at Stalingrad in 1942 occurred largely due to supply failures, with German forces surrounded and dependent on inadequate airlift, while Soviet forces methodically tightened the noose. The defeat in North Africa happened because Rommel could never get adequate fuel and ammunition, his brilliant tactical victories meaningless when his tanks sat immobile for lack of gasoline. The collapse in Normandy and France accelerated once Allied logistics began functioning effectively, overwhelming German defensive efforts through sheer material superiority. American truck drivers, 3/4 of them black soldiers facing discrimination at home, demonstrated that democracy could organize better, produce more, and fight harder than fascism. They proved that a nation respecting individual initiative, even imperfectly and incompletely, could outperform one built on rigid hierarchy and racial mythology. They showed that free peoples properly equipped and led could accomplish extraordinary things. The African-American soldiers of the Red Ball Express served with distinction despite facing racism that denied them combat roles and full equality. Ernest Myers of the 3214 Quartermaster Service Company articulated their motivation with simple clarity. We wanted to make an impression for the people back home. We wanted to show that black men were combat ready. They succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation. White soldiers who depended on Red Ball supplies recognized the driver's valor even when broader society refused to grant them equality. An armored division commander praised drivers who delivered gasoline under constant fire with words that acknowledged reality. Damn if I would want their job. They have what it takes. A tank driver with the 5th Armored Division stated the simple truth. If it wasn't for the Red Ball, we couldn't have moved. Colonel John Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander's son, argued without qualification that without the Red Ball truck drivers, the advance across France could not have been made. General Patton declared with characteristic bluntness that the 2.5-ton truck is our most valuable weapon, more important than tanks or artillery. These statements came from officers in a segregated military that officially considered black soldiers unfit for combat roles. The contradiction was not lost on the drivers who proved their worth while being denied equality, demonstrated courage while facing discrimination, helped destroy Nazi racial ideology while living under American racial segregation. They understood the bitter irony of fighting for freedom abroad while being denied it at home. The Red Ball Express became a microcosm of the double fee campaign that the Pittsburgh Courier, an influential black newspaper, had promoted since 1942. Victory over fascism abroad, victory over racism at home. African American soldiers saw their service as advancing both causes simultaneously, proving through action what words alone could not demonstrate. The success of the Red Ball Express made arguments against black military capability impossible to maintain with any credibility, though racism persisted long after the war ended. The implications carried far beyond immediate tactical advantage. The operation demonstrated conclusively that American logistics could support sustained offensive operations against any enemy anywhere. It proved that American industry could outproduce any rival regardless of their supposed efficiency or dedication. It showed that democratic organization could surpass totalitarian efficiency when properly motivated and led. These lessons shaped post-war military doctrine fundamentally and permanently. The United States military became permanently committed to mechanization and robust logistics as the foundation of military power. Every subsequent American military operation, from Korea through Vietnam to the Gulf Wars and beyond, has emphasized logistics and supply chain dominance as prerequisites for success. The understanding that amateurs study tactics while professionals study logistics became institutional knowledge embedded in military education and doctrine. The Red Ball Express validated this principle definitively and irrefutably. The German officer corps, trained to appreciate operational excellence and professional competence, understood clearly what they had witnessed. Captured generals, interrogated extensively about Allied capabilities, consistently emphasized American logistics as the decisive factor that made German victory impossible regardless of tactical or operational success. German tactical skill remained high throughout the war. German equipment, particularly tanks and anti-tank guns, often surpassed Allied equivalents in quality. German soldiers fought tenaciously even when defeat was certain, but none of it mattered against an enemy that could deliver unlimited supplies to the front, replace losses immediately, and sustain operations indefinitely. The Red Ball Express represented something deeper and more significant than tactical logistics. It embodied American industrial democracy in action, translating abstract principles into concrete results. Civilian truck designs adapted for military use demonstrated the value of standardization. Workers from diverse backgrounds trained as drivers showed that talent exists everywhere when opportunity is provided. Officers improvised solutions to unprecedented problems, proving that rigid hierarchy inhibits rather than enables excellence. The system worked because individuals at every level took initiative, solved problems creatively, and adapted to changing circumstances without waiting for orders from above. This contrasted sharply with German military culture that emphasized obedience, hierarchy, and following orders without question. The Wehrmacht emphasized centralized planning with innovation reserved for senior commanders. Lower ranks executed plans meticulously, but did not modify them even when circumstances changed. When unexpected problems emerged, the system struggled to adapt, because adaptation required approval from higher authority that might be unavailable or too distant to respond quickly. The Red Ball Express thrived on flexibility and improvisation. Drivers ignored regulations when those regulations hindered the mission. They removed governors limiting truck speed because getting supplies forward mattered more than following speed limits. They exceeded weight limits because delivering ammunition mattered more than preserving vehicles. They traveled alone rather than in convoys because speed mattered more than following procedures. Officers tolerated and sometimes encouraged this behavior because results mattered more than rules. Military police enforced the rules that mattered, particularly absolute priority for Red Ball convoys, while ignoring violations that did not compromise the mission. This pragmatic approach succeeded brilliantly where rigid adherence to regulations would have failed. The Red Ball moved more supplies faster than any logistics operation in history to that point. It sustained the most rapid sustained advance in modern warfare against prepared opposition. It proved conclusively that democratic systems emphasizing individual initiative could outperform authoritarian ones emphasizing obedience when properly organized and motivated. The lessons extended well beyond military applications into post-war American society. The Red Ball Express influenced infrastructure development profoundly. General Eisenhower, impressed by German autobahns observed during the war and shaped by his experience with military logistics, championed the interstate highway system vigorously when he became president in the 1950s. The interstates, explicitly justified as military necessity for rapid movement of military units and supplies, were consciously designed to facilitate logistics. The Red Ball's one-way loop system directly informed their design with separate lanes for different directions and limited access points to maintain traffic flow. The trucks themselves became legendary symbols of American reliability and industrial might. The GMC Jimmy served in every theater of World War II with distinction. It operated in North Africa's deserts, withstanding heat and sand. It climbed Italy's mountains, navigating narrow roads and steep grades. It slogged through France's mud, maintaining mobility when other vehicles bogged down. It endured Germany's winter, functioning in conditions that disabled less robust designs. It transported supplies across Pacific islands, operating in humidity and jungle that destroyed equipment not properly protected. Over 560,000 Jimmies were built during the war. Many remained in American military service through Korea and into the Vietnam era, a testament to their durability and adaptability. Surplus Jimmies equipped Allied armies worldwide, serving in dozens of countries for decades. The truck became an international symbol of American reliability and industrial capacity. Even today, surviving Jimmies are prized by collectors and military vehicle enthusiasts who appreciate their historical significance and continued functionality. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, surviving Red Ball Express drivers held a reunion in Austin, Texas. Over 500 former drivers returned, many bringing families to show them where their contribution to victory had begun. These elderly men, now respected members of their communities, remembered vividly the fear, exhaustion, and pride of their service. They had proven themselves under the most demanding circumstances. They had demonstrated that Black Americans could perform any mission when given opportunity and proper support. The reunion featured speakers who captured the operation's significance with eloquence and emotion. Former Staff Sergeant Ernest Myers, aged 79, delivered remarks that resonated with all present. "We drove through the night without lights," he said, his voice strong despite his years. "We drove through enemy territory without weapons. We drove until we could barely stay awake. We did it because we knew our brothers at the front needed us. We did it because we wanted to prove what Black Americans could accomplish. We did it because it needed doing." The applause lasted several minutes, washing over Myers in waves of recognition and respect. Former enemies and former comrades stood together, united in recognition of what had been accomplished. The Red Ball Express had not merely won a campaign or supplied an army. It had demonstrated conclusively that logistics could be decisive, that democracy could organize effectively, that racial barriers were artificial and destructive, and that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when properly led and equipped. The magnitude of the achievement becomes crystal clear through direct comparison with German capabilities. The entire German military logistics system during Operation Barbarossa, the largest military operation in history involving over 3 million men advancing across a 2,000-mile front, consumed more resources to advance 600 miles than the Red Ball Express required to sustain advances of 400 miles, while supporting multiple army groups simultaneously operating on a much narrower front. The Red Ball operated on a fraction of the frontage with fewer troops, but ton-mile for ton-mile, accounting for distance and tonnage moved, it was exponentially more efficient than anything the Wehrmacht accomplished. This efficiency resulted directly from American industrial design, standardization enabling interchangeability of parts, mass production reducing costs, and increasing availability and organizational flexibility, allowing rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. German trucks were excellent vehicles individually, representing high-quality engineering and craftsmanship, but they came in dozens of incompatible types requiring different parts, different maintenance procedures, and different training for operators and mechanics. American trucks were ruthlessly standardized. Every Jimmy used the same parts regardless of when or where it was built. Any mechanic trained on Jimmys could repair any Jimmy anywhere. Spare parts were completely interchangeable between vehicles. This mundane reality, boring to discuss but critical in practice, proved decisive in sustained operations. The Red Ball Express stands as eternal testament to several profound truths that extend beyond military history into universal principles. Logistics determine what is possible on battlefields and in life. Industrial capacity matters more than tactical brilliance when conflicts extend beyond initial encounters. Democratic organization can surpass authoritarian systems when properly structured and led. Racial barriers harm nations that maintain them while conferring no benefit to anyone. Ordinary people, given proper leadership, resources, and opportunity, can achieve results that seem impossible before they demonstrate otherwise. The German Blitzkrieg conquered nations through speed, shock, and tactical excellence. The American Red Ball Express conquered continents through endurance, organization, and industrial capacity. One was a sprint showcasing German tactical superiority. The other was a marathon demonstrating American industrial strength. In total war between major powers, marathons matter more than sprints because initial advantages erode while sustained capacity compounds. The story of the Red Ball Express is ultimately a story of victory through long-term preparation meeting immediate necessity. American industrial capacity did not emerge overnight or by accident. It resulted from decades of investment in infrastructure connecting the nation, education creating skilled workers, manufacturing capability building factories and supply chains, and technological development improving designs and processes. The trucks that won the war were designed before the war began. The factories that built them were constructed over decades. The road network that allowed their use was built over generations by federal, state, and local governments. The industrial base that supplied them had developed since the late 19th century. When war came, America could surge production dramatically because the foundation existed and only required expansion rather than creation from nothing. Germany, despite impressive industrial capacity and justifiable pride in engineering excellence, never built that foundation comprehensively. German industry excelled at quality, but failed at quantity. German logistics excelled at pre-war planning, but failed at wartime adaptation. German military culture excelled at obedience, but failed at initiative. These weaknesses, minor in short campaigns against inferior opponents, proved fatal in extended conflict against comparable powers. The Red Ball Express exposed all these weaknesses through direct comparison that made excuses impossible. By November 1944, when the Red Ball officially ended, its mission was complete. Allied logistics had transitioned to more efficient rail and port-based systems that could sustain armies indefinitely, but its legacy endured and continues to this day. The drivers scattered to other duties. The trucks continued serving in other capacities. The lessons learned shaped military doctrine for generations and continue influencing logistics operations. In the final accounting, the Red Ball Express represented more than trucks and supplies moving across France. It represented the triumph of democratic industrial power over authoritarian military force. It demonstrated conclusively that free peoples, properly organized and equipped, could outproduce, outsupply, and ultimately defeat any tyranny regardless of initial advantages. The young men who drove those trucks, most of them black soldiers serving a country that denied them full equality, proved this truth through their service under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. They returned home to face continued discrimination. Many joined the civil rights movement, applying lessons learned about organization and persistence. All carried the knowledge that they had proven their worth and capability under circumstances that destroyed lesser men. They had demonstrated that black Americans could perform any mission when given opportunity. This knowledge could not be erased or denied, though racism persisted for decades. The Red Ball Express never truly ended. It transformed into a symbol representing the decisive importance of logistics in modern warfare. Every American soldier who has served since 1944 has benefited from lessons learned on those French roads. Every military logistics operation since has built on that foundation. Every appreciation of how logistics determine victory traces back to those 83 days when trucks won a war that tanks could not. The German Blitzkrieg conquered through speed and stopped when supplies ran out. The American Red Ball Express conquered through endurance and stopped only when its mission was complete. History records definitively which approach proved superior when tested against comparable opponents over sustained periods. The mathematics were clear, undeniable, and decisive. American trucks, driven by American soldiers, supplied by American factories, running on American fuel, proved more effective strategically than German tanks, German soldiers, German factories, and German horses combined. The most mechanized military in history was not the Wehrmacht, despite propaganda suggesting otherwise. It was the United States Army, and the Red Ball Express was its beating heart, pumping supplies forward with the regularity and reliability that made victory inevitable once achieved. They keep them rolling, as the motto said, and in rolling forward relentlessly, they rolled over every obstacle and rolled into history as proof that logistics wins wars.